My name is Mackenzie Thompson. I'm 28 years old. And last Christmas, I was uninvited from my own family's holiday gathering in the most humiliating way possible. I showed up with handmade gifts. A bourbon pecan pie that took me hours to perfect. Wearing my nicest forest green sweater dress and my grandmother's necklace, only to have the front door of my aunt's house opened and shut on me. Figuratively and emotionally. "We don't want you here. Go ruin someone else's holiday," she said. Her voice as cold as the snow crunching under my boots. Behind her, the house was glowing with Christmas lights. The smell of pine and cinnamon drifting from the open doorway. And the sound of laughter and clinking glasses floating in the air. I stood there frozen, holding a pie that was still warm and gift bags filled with carefully chosen presents for each member of my family. Inside that house was my mother. My siblings. My cousins, people who used to be my people. 10 minutes later, just as I was about to walk back to my car in stunned silence, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. And my father, who hadn't been invited either, stepped out of his car and shouted my name like he was afraid I'd already disappeared. But let me back up. Because the way we got here wasn't sudden. It was a slow, painful unraveling, thread by thread, until the whole thing fell apart in a single, breath-stealing moment. Growing up in the Thompson family felt like living inside a perfectly wrapped gift box. Everything looked good from the outside, polished, smiling family portraits. Mom's Instagram full of holiday baking and matching pajamas, but inside, it was tight. Airless. Like if you dared to stretch, to question, to ask for something different, the ribbon would snap and the whole illusion would collapse. My dad, David, was the one real thing in that entire house. He was an old-school civil engineer who believed in early mornings, classic rock, and showing up. He wasn't flashy or eloquent, but he was solid. When I had nightmares as a kid, he was the one who sat beside my bed, humming low to soothe me. When I won a statewide architecture competition in high school, he was the only one who understood what it meant. My mom, Karen, was the opposite. Beautiful, charming, social. She knew how to work a room, but struggled to hold a genuine conversation at home. Image was everything to her. She always reminded me to smile wider, wear foundation, brush my hair a different way, speak softer. Aunt Laura, Herr younger sister, took that performative perfectionism to a whole new level. She was the kind of woman who made you feel judged just by standing near her. When my parents divorced 5 years ago, Laura swooped in like a divorce attorney, and an emotional bulldozer rolled into one. She whispered to my mom that she'd been wronged, that Dad must be hiding money, that I'd been manipulated by choosing to spend more time with him. At first, it was subtle birthday invites that left him off the list. Holidays that were suddenly too complicated to coordinate. Then it became targeted. And it wasn't just him they were phasing out. It was me, too. After the divorce, my older brother Connor and younger sister Amber stayed with Mom and Laura. I was finishing my degree in architectural design and had moved into Dad's apartment across town. We didn't have much, but it was peaceful. He respected my space, asked about my designs, and never once made me feel like I had to perform for his approval. Meanwhile, family holidays turned into negotiations. Every Thanksgiving or Christmas meant emotional calculus: who would be where, who could tolerate whose presence, which parent would be sacrificed for the sake of keeping the peace. It was never Dad who got chosen. And, eventually, it wasn't me either. I was too vocal, Too loyal to the wrong parent. Too unwilling to pretend. But I kept trying. I sent Amber art supplies and notes when she got into college. I mailed Connor a leather planner for his business school internship. I even sent Laura a card on her birthday. Most were met with silence or cold replies like, "Oh, you're still doing that little architecture thing," or "Connor's girlfriend got him a real pen set. But thanks. Still. When Mom called last December and said, "We think it's time to move past all this," I wanted so badly to believe her. She said Amber missed me. That Connor wanted me to meet his girlfriend. That Laura was cooking prime rib and everyone was excited. I was skeptical. But hopeful. "You're sure?" I asked. She hesitated. "We talked about it. Everyone agrees. Your family." Mackenzie. I didn't tell Dad right away. He'd warned me before about Laura's influence. "People like that don't change," he said. "They just get better at pretending." But I wanted to give them one more chance. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was me clinging to some fantasy version of family I never really had. I spent days preparing thoughtful, personalized gifts. For Amber, a hand-bound sketchbook with textured paper I'd found at a local artisan shop. For Connor, a set of vintage blueprints I'd restored myself. For Mom, a restored photo of her and Grandma in sepia tones. Something I knew she'd never expect, but secretly cherish. Even for Laura, an engraved silver pen. Powerful and elegant. Exactly the kind of thing she'd boast about at work. And I baked a bourbon pecan pie from scratch using the old family recipe from Dad's side, the same one Mom banned from holidays after the divorce. I showed up to Laura's house on Christmas Day like someone heading into a truce, arms full. Walls lowered. Heart cautiously open. The neighborhood was glowing with synchronized lights. The driveway was packed with sleek black cars. I walked up the steps, my boots crunching against snow. Butterflies flapping wild in my stomach. The door opened almost immediately. Like they'd seen me coming. Laura stood there in a red silk dress and pearls, holding a glass of champagne. Her smile faded the second our eyes met. "We don't want you here," she said. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just factually. Like someone telling you your reservation had been lost. Go ruin someone else's holiday. I blinked. For a second. I truly thought I'd misheard. What I managed. Mom invited me. She called me. Laura gave a tight smile. Karen made a mistake. We talked about it. You're not part of this anymore. I looked past her into the house. Mom was adjusting the centerpiece on the dining table. Amber candles flickering. Connor was pouring wine. Amber laughing at something on her phone. No one looked up. No one turned to the door. I stood there, holding the pie and gift bags. Heart hammering like it was trying to escape my chest. My voice cracked. Does she even know I'm here? Laura's expression didn't change. Please leave before this gets uncomfortable. And just like that, every bit of hope I had unraveled. I turned to go. Legs like jelly. Vision blurred. The pie starting to tilt in my grip. That's when I heard its tires skidding into the driveway. A car door slamming. And a voice I hadn't heard in weeks yelling my name like it was the only word that mattered. That voice gravelly. Familiar. Urgent cut through the December air like a knife. Mackenzie. My dad's truck was still rumbling at the curb. Headlights casting long shadows across the pristine driveway. Hess strode toward me. Boots crunching the snow. His denim jacket dusted with frost. Jaw tight, and eyes locked on mine, like I might vanish if he blinked. For the first time since the door slammed in my face. My body moved. Not consciously. More like muscle memory. I turned toward him as he reached me and caught my shoulder. Eyes scanning my face for damage he couldn't yet name. He didn't even look toward the house. "What did she say to you?" I couldn't answer. The words were buried under layers of humiliation and rage. I just shook my head. And that was enough. He looked past me. Up the front steps. Where Laura still stood, holding her champagne flute like it was a weapon. His voice dropped an octave. "You said she was invited." Laura's smile twisted. "David. Don't cause a scene. It's Christmas." That set him off. "You humiliated my daughter on your porch. In front of her family. On Christmas. And you're worried about a scene." He stepped closer. Voice rising, not yelling. But loud enough for every person inside to hear. "You people don't deserve her. She's more decent than the lot of you put together." The door behind Laura opened wider. And now Mom appeared. Her face stiff with discomfort. "David. This isn't your house," she said. "You have no right to show up, and no right." He cut in. "I have every right to protect my kid from this garbage. You stood by and let them freeze her out." Again. Her eyes flickered to mine but didn't soften. She looked tired. Older than I remembered. "This isn't about you," she muttered. "No," he replied. "It never is. Not until someone calls out the truth." Inside the house. I could see movement. Connor's tall frame pacing by the fireplace. Amber hesitating near the tree. Gift in hand. Confusion on her face. I wanted to run. To leave the shattered pie. The gifts. The guilt, all of it. But something rooted me there. Watching two people who used to be married now fighting not for each other, but for what was left of me. Then Laura stepped between them. Her voice as slick as oil. "You need to leave. Both of you. Before the police are involved." My dad scoffed. "Go ahead. Call them. Let's see how your perfect family looks on a police report." I stepped in then. Hand on his arm. "Let's go," I said. My voice shaking. "They're not worth it." He didn't argue. He wrapped one arm around my shoulders. Turned us both around. And walked back toward the truck. Behind us. The door slammed shut with a finality that wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Something inside me. Some small lingering hope that they'd ever really want me. Finally, snapped loose. We didn't talk much on the drive home. He asked once if I wanted music. I shook my head. Mostly I just stared out the window. Watching the lights blur past. Feeling the shame begin to morph slowly. Painfully into something harder. Not anger. Not yet. But a question. Why? Why invite me? Only to humiliate me. Why pretend? What was the point of that cruelty? At home, he made us lasagna, his holiday tradition since the divorce. I couldn't eat much. But the act of sitting at that tiny kitchen table, watching him move around with quiet efficiency, grounded me. At some point, Jenna came by. Uninvited but expected. She brought peppermint cookies and a bottle of red. I was 5 minutes away. She said, hugging me tightly. "I knew you'd need company." We didn't say the word family again that night. Instead, we watched bad holiday movies, sipped wine, and tried to laugh. Around midnight, I posted a photo just the edge of our table. The glowing lights. My dad's hand resting on his coffee mug with the caption, Sometimes the best gifts are the ones you give yourself, like peace. I didn't tag anyone. But I didn't need to. The message was loud enough. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. Amber showed up at my apartment. She was wearing a hoodie too thin for the cold, hair in a messy bun, eyes red-rimmed but determined. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside without a word. She stood in my living room, looking around like she was entering a memory. Then she pulled a sketchbook from her tote bag. "I brought this," she said. "I wanted to show you before anyone else." It was her college portfolio full of color studies, architectural crossovers, and designs inspired by my old drafts. "They said you abandoned us," she whispered. "That Dad manipulated you. That you wanted to be separate." Her voice cracked. "But when I saw you standing outside, and no one moved when Mom just looked away, I realized who really left." She sat on my couch and cried. And I let her. For hours. That night. She didn't go back. In the weeks that followed, the fallout began. Mom texted once, "You've poisoned your sister against her family." I didn't reply. Instead, I helped Amber with college applications. And we co-created a design project she submitted to 3 scholarship programs. She got into 2. Connor messaged me a month later. A bland, "Hope you're well," laced with guilt and self-preservation. I didn't respond, but I saw through it. Something in him had shifted, not quite regret. More like unease. Like he could feel the ground beneath the family starting to tremble, but wasn't ready to admit why. And then came the Facebook post. Laura. Of course. A long, vague screed about ungrateful children and how real sacrifice is never appreciated. No names. But the comments were full of people echoing her pain, calling her so strong, telling her kids these days have no respect. I screenshotted it and sent it to Dad with a single message. "This is who they are now." He replied, "They always were. Now they're just louder." But it wasn't until 2 months later that the final line was drawn. I came home one day to find a letter in my mailbox. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a typed note, the kind used for ransom letters or cult manifestos. At the bottom, bolded and center-aligned, "You may have won the battle, but family never forgets." No greeting. No signature. Just that. My chest went tight. Not from fear, but from clarity. They still believed they held some kind of power. That the word family would make me cave. Make me doubt myself. Make me return to the table like nothing had happened. But that letter wasn't a reminder of ties. It was a funeral notice for them. For the version of them I once needed to believe in. For the idea that blood would ever be enough. I stared at those words. Let them sink in. And then, without ceremony, I fed the letter into the shredder. But even then, I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. Something inside me had changed. The silence. The exile. The years of gaslighting and manipulation. They weren't just painful. They were part of a pattern. And I was done being part of it. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was accountability. Because the next time they tried to hurt someone, I'd make damn sure they'd remember who I had become. The next morning, I woke up with a different kind of clarity. The kind that didn't need to shout or prove anything to anyone. Just calm. Clean focus. For years, I had let them rewrite the story. I was difficult. Too loyal to Dad. The one who pulled away. But now I understood what they were doing. They didn't cut me out because I was disloyal. They cut me out because I refused to play the role they needed me to play. The quiet daughter who smiled in family photos and didn't ask why mom always made excuses for Connor's entitlement. The one who never questioned why Laura got to dictate every holiday. Or why dad was erased, like he never existed. That Mackenzie had died the night I stood on Laura's porch holding a pie she never touched. What remained was someone sharper. Still kind. But no longer soft. Still loyal. But no longer obedient. It was time to take control of the story. Not for vengeance. For the truth. I started with the letter. I scanned it. Checked the printer marks. And uploaded it into a digital tracking tool my friend Kira had once shown me. She worked in corporate security and owed me a favor. Can you trace where this was printed? I asked. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Give me 48 hours, she said. While I waited, I began building a timeline. Every event. Every exclusion. Every slight, from the moment of the divorce to the Facebook post. The lies. The door slam. And finally the anonymous threat. I organized them not out of pettiness, but to understand their method. Patterns don't lie. And once I saw it all on paper, a chilling realization hit me. They hadn't just tried to erase Dad. They had tried to erase me. I had become inconvenient to their narrative. So they painted me as damaged, difficult, disloyal, then treated me accordingly until I started to believe it myself. But now I had perspective. And support. Amber had moved into a studio apartment nearby and was thriving. She'd been accepted into a summer architecture program at Columbia. We spent weekends sketching, laughing, healing. Dad, too, was steadier. He's still worried, especially after the letter. But he also saw what I was building. You're turning the pain into structure, he said one night, nodding at the whiteboard where I'd mapped everything. That's what architects do. Right. Take chaos and give it shape. I smiled. Exactly. And this time, I'm designing the ending. 42 hours later, Kira called. That letter was printed on a Canon MX 920. Probably in someone's home office. But here's the interesting part: it was sent to the printer via remote access from a Gmail account, Thompson Legacy. Family@gmail.com. My breath caught. Who owns the account? Unclear. It's a masked account. Fake info on the profile. But the IP address traced to a residential address, your aunt's place. Of course it was. Laura. The queen of plausible deniability. My mind raced not just at the petty nature of the threat, but at the brazenness. She still thought she was untouchable. That's when I decided I wouldn't expose her on social media, or send legal threats she could dance around. No, I'd hit her where it hurt. Reputation, power, image. The three things she guarded like gospel. I wasn't going to destroy her. I was going to unmask her. Quietly. Surgically. Completely. I reached out to an old college friend, Derek, who now worked at a nonprofit watchdog group that investigated financial misconduct in public institutions. You still doing that background check thing? I asked. Always, he said. Why, you got a target? I gave him Laura's full name. Job title: VP of Operations at a regional education foundation, and said, I just want to know if her house is as clean as her Christmas cards. What we found was illuminating. Nothing illegal. Not exactly. But several grant misallocations. Conflicts of interest involving a private school where her daughter had been given a full ride after Laura helped approve a new budget line. Derek raised an eyebrow. None of this would hold up in court. But in the public eye, he whistled. If someone brought this to the board, she'd be out in a week. I nodded. That's all I needed to know. Meanwhile, Amber had her own idea. Let me record a statement, she said, about what happened. About how Mom and Laura manipulated everything. Not for drama, just so people understand what you walked away from. He hesitated. You don't have to, I want to. She cut in. I need to. We filmed it in one take. Amber spoke plainly. Emotionally. But with calm conviction. She described the emotional pressure. The rewriting of history. How our mom would gaslight her into doubting her own instincts. They needed Mackenzie to be the villain so they could justify pushing her out. But she wasn't. She was the one who stayed honest. The video was never posted publicly. But I sent it directly to the family group chat. No caption. No commentary. Just Amber's voice. Breaking the narrative they'd spent years constructing. For 2 days. There was silence. Then came the unraveling. Connor reached out first. Not with blame. But confusion. Why would she say all that he texted? Is it true? I replied with one sentence. It's always been true. You just never looked. Then Mom called. Not to apologize. But to plead. You've embarrassed us. She said. What you're doing, it's vindictive. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just told her what she refused to accept. This isn't revenge. Mom. This is what it looks like when someone stops pretending. She tried to pivot. You think you're better than us. And maybe. In that moment. I was. Not because I had all the answers. But because I had faced the pain and chosen not to pass it on. I had healed instead of hiding. Told the truth instead of rewriting it. But the final blow came from outside. 1 week later, Derek forwarded me a press release. Laura had stepped down from her position to focus on family matters. No scandal. No headlines. Just quiet exit. But I knew. And she knew. And that was enough. She never reached out. Neither did Mom. But the silence was no longer threatening. It was freedom. For the first time, the story wasn't being dictated to me. I was the one holding the pen. It's strange. The quiet after a storm. You brace for aftershocks. For retaliation. For whispers and shadows. But sometimes, what follows isn't chaos, it's absence. And that can feel louder than any explosion. After Laura stepped down, the messages stopped. The guilt-drenched texts. The manipulative voicemails. Even the Facebook martyrdom posts went silent. For weeks. It was like the entire branch of my family had fallen into a black hole. No birthdays. No forwarded chain emails. Not even a card on Easter. At first, the silence felt like victory. Then it started to feel like mourning. Amber visited more often now. Though she never stayed long. College kept her busy. And she was thriving, really thriving. Winning awards. Pitching designs. Laughing again. But sometimes, I'd catch her staring out the window with that distant look, the one I knew too well. Do you ever miss it? She asked one night over takeout. Not them. She clarified. Just the idea of them. I nodded. Sometimes I miss the version of them I thought was real. Her eyes welled up. Me too. We didn't cry. Not then. We just sat in it. Let the grief pass through without trying to label it. And grief, I realized, is not always for the dead. Sometimes it's for the living, for the family we hope to have, the parents we imagined would protect us, the siblings we believed were safe. Letting go of that fantasy is a kind of death. And no matter how justified your escape, it still leaves ghosts. Around that time, I got a letter from my grandmother Dad's mom. We hadn't spoken in years. Not by choice. Just neglect. She lived in Arizona. Sent Christmas cards with photos of her garden. And occasionally mailed clippings from local papers about cacti or rattlesnake sightings. This letter, though, was different. I heard what happened. It began. Not from your mom, she stopped returning my calls, but from your father. He didn't tell me everything. He didn't have to. I could hear it in his voice. She went on to say she was proud of me. That standing up for yourself, even against family, is a kind of integrity most people never master. And then she wrote something I never forgot. They may call you heartless, but it takes a deeply feeling heart to say enough. That letter stayed taped inside my closet door for months. Meanwhile, my professional life quietly soared. Clients increased. A feature about me and Amber's architecture concept landed in an online magazine. People noticed. One woman at a conference approached me and said, "Your story inspired my daughter to leave a toxic home. I don't know the details, but thank you." I hadn't even realized Amber's video had circulated among advocacy groups. She'd shared it anonymously for a youth initiative focused on emotional abuse awareness. Her words had rippled outward in ways we couldn't have predicted. And with that came something I hadn't expected: community. Emails, comments, private messages from people saying, "That happened to me too." Strangers who saw themselves in our pain and finally felt permission to name their own. It was beautiful and heavy, because with every message came the reminder this wasn't just my story. It was systemic. A culture of silence, of loyalty weaponized, of families hiding their rot behind church pews and holiday garlands. I found myself both healed and haunted. One afternoon, Jenna pulled me aside after we grabbed coffee. She looked nervous. "You okay?" I asked. She hesitated. "You know I love you. And I support you. But I ran into your mom last week." My breath caught. "Where?" "At a community gala. She came up to me. Asked about you. Said she missed you. That she was praying for you. She didn't say anything awful. Just sad." I exhaled. "She's not sad for me. She's sad she can't control me anymore." Jenna winced. "I know. But it still stung to hear her talk like you were lost. Like you'd fallen under some spell." I smiled. Not bitterly, but with a clarity that had taken me years to earn. I did fall under a spell. One they cast. And I broke it. That's what scares them. Still. Her words lingered. She said she was praying for you. I lay awake that night, wondering what that prayer sounded like. If it came from guilt or grace. If it was whispered out of love or desperation. But I didn't dwell. Because healing isn't about erasing the pain. It's about not letting it dictate your next step. And my next step was forward. Amber and I took a weekend trip that spring to Chicago, just us. Museums. Food. Long walks. One night in the hotel room, she turned to me and said, "You think they'll ever come around?" I paused. "I think they'll rewrite the story until they can live with it. And in their version, we'll always be the villains." She nodded. "But at least it's not our burden anymore." That line stuck with me. Not our burden anymore. Freedom doesn't always look like a grand declaration. Sometimes it's a quiet weekend in a new city. Sometimes it's a voicemail you delete without listening. Sometimes it's just peace. Earned the hard way. And yet there was one more thread. The last one. Connor. He hadn't said much since the fallout. A few awkward texts. One email with no subject line and nothing in the body but a single sentence. I didn't know it was that bad. I hadn't answered. But he lingered in my mind. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because he was the mirror. The one who got to stay. The one who went along with the story. And part of me wondered if he'd ever be brave enough to question it. I didn't reach out. I didn't owe him that. But when I saw his name flash across my screen one Thursday night, I let it ring once. Then again, and then I picked up. Hey. His voice was softer than I remembered. Tentative. Like it wasn't sure it belonged. I sat on the edge of the couch. Eyes fixed on the blank television screen. Hi. I said. Cautious. I didn't think you'd pick up. He admitted. I almost didn't. I replied. Truthfully. There was a long pause. One of those silences that used to feel natural when we were kids. Sitting side by side at the kitchen table building Lego castles. But now it carried weight. History. Wreckage. I saw Amber's video. He said finally. I watched it twice. I said nothing. I didn't owe him comfort. It made me sick. He added. Not because of what she said. But because she was right. And I didn't want her to be. That part landed. Not quite an apology. But a crack in the wall. I leaned back. You saw what you were allowed to see. Connor. The rest. You chose not to. His breath caught. Maybe in guilt. Maybe defensiveness. I know. He stopped himself. I didn't think they could be that cruel. I stared at the ceiling. They weren't cruel to you. That's the difference. Another pause. You think I'm like them? He asked quietly. I think you benefited from their version of the story. And you didn't ask questions because it made your life easier. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, Mom told me you changed. That you were unstable. That you were punishing her for leaving Dad. A bitter laugh escaped me. Of course she did. It's easier to call me broken than admit she broke something. I'm sorry. He said. 2 words. Simple. Honest. Not performative. Not wrapped in excuses. And somehow, that made them land heavier. I believed him. For the first time in years. I believed he meant it. Why now? I asked. Because I didn't realize how much I'd missed you. He said. Until I saw what they did to you. And I wondered how much of what I thought I knew was never real. It was a rare moment of clarity between siblings. Both raised in the same house but fed different versions of love. I wanted to lean in. To offer a clean slate. But some wounds don't close with a phone call. I don't hate you, Connor, I said. But I can't go back. I've worked too hard to build something real. Something not held together by silence and forced smiles. He was quiet again. Then, can I be part of that? The real thing? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to. But because I didn't know yet if he could be. And I wouldn't say yes to anything I hadn't fully decided. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. No tears. No anger. Just stillness. The kind that comes after you've finally said what needed to be said. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years: hope. Not for reconciliation. Not even for forgiveness. But for clarity. for forward motion, for the freedom of living unburdened by the lies of others. Weeks passed. Spring turned to summer. Amber finished her semester and got a summer internship in New York. Dad sold his place in Denver and moved to a quiet cabin upstate, somewhere with trees and silence and a porch that faced the lake. I visited twice. We didn't talk much about the past anymore. We didn't need to. It was in the way he made tea before I asked. In the way he looked at me like he could finally exhale. We had survived the fire and found each other on the other side. That was enough. One Saturday, I sat on the floor of my new apartment, reorganizing old files. Somewhere between tax folders and blueprints, I found a faded photo. Me, Connor, and Amber. Back when we were kids, we were on the front porch, popsicles in hand, faces sticky and bright. For a second, I felt the ache of what could have been. But then I tucked it away. Not out of bitterness, but because the past no longer had a claim on me. There was one last thing I needed to do. I took a deep breath and opened a new document. At the top, I wrote Inheritance of Silence, A Sister's Reckoning. It was the title of the piece I'd avoided writing for months. Not an exposé, not a vendetta, but a reckoning. A story. Mine. I wrote not to destroy, but to rebuild. To explain. To name the wound. To map the escape route. And maybe, just maybe, to leave breadcrumbs for the next person who feels trapped in a family that tells them silence is love. By the time I finished the first draft, it was midnight. I sat back, eyes blurry but heart calm. Not triumphant. Not victorious. Just settle. Like something had clicked into place. The next day, I submitted the piece to a literary journal that focused on trauma and personal narrative. 2 weeks later, I got an email they wanted to publish it. I didn't tell Mom. Or Laura. Or even Connor. I didn't need to. Because it wasn't for them. It was for me. And maybe for someone like me. Sitting in the dark. Wondering if they were the problem when all along they were just the first to see the rot and refused to play along. Story 2. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 32 years old. And for years, I was the invisible backbone of my family, the one quietly keeping everything together. Every month, I sent money mortgage payments for my mother's house, car payments for my cousin, tuition for my younger sister. It was exhausting. But I thought it was love. Duty. Family. I believed that by being the silent provider, I was earning respect. A place at the table. But deep down, I was just a resource, a walking ATM. That realization came crashing down on me one ordinary Sunday morning. The day I accidentally overheard the truth I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a pocket dial. One of those moments people laugh off, but for me, it shattered everything. My uncle was ranting about me on a family call. She's just a pathetic ATM who thinks money makes her worth something. He sneered. And I froze. The casual cruelty in their voices was deafening. But what stung most was how they dismissed me. How they didn't even see me as a person. I stayed silent. My throat tight. Heart pounding. Before quietly ending the call. That moment marked the beginning of the end. The weeks before had been a blur of effort and quiet desperation. My job in tech kept me busy long hours. I high stress, but I told myself it was worth it. Every dollar I sent was a stitch holding my fractured family together. At first, they seemed proud. I was the successful one. The girl who made good. The one who could provide. But their pride was surface level. A fragile veneer that cracked under the weight of expectation and entitlement. Decisions about the family were made without me. Conversations I wasn't invited to. Opinions I wasn't asked for. My presence was tolerated as long as I fulfilled my role. I craved their approval. Tried harder. Gave more. Hoping to bridge the widening gap. And yet, I remained invisible, seen only through the lens of what I could give. Never for who I was. That phone call was the truth laid bare. I heard laughter and chatter from my mother's house. The sound of plates clinking. And the jingle of the wind chimes she hung by the porch. They were gathered family. Close and extended. Talking about me like I wasn't there. They laughed at the idea that I thought money gave me worth. My aunt mocked me, saying I opened my wallet like a trained dog. No one defended me. Not even my mother. It was a cruel symphony of dismissal and disdain that echoed in my ears long after the call ended. I sat in stunned silence. The weight of betrayal pressing down like a physical force. It wasn't just what they said, it was how easily they discarded me. How little I mattered beyond the money. For 2 days, I said nothing. I didn't confront them. I didn't call to demand explanations or apologies. Instead, I stopped the payments. Every single one. Mortgage. Car. Tuition, all canceled. No warnings. No notices. The silence on my end was louder than any scream. I needed to see if they could survive without me to feel what it was like when I stopped being the solution and became the problem. Within 3 days, the storm broke loose. My phone exploded with calls, texts, voicemails, a frantic chorus of panic and anger. Mom called over and over, her voice trembling, pleading about missed payments and late fees. Cousin texts came in all caps, accusing me of jeopardizing the family's stability. My sister's messages were desperate, begging me not to let her lose her spot at school. Voicemails mixed panic and blame. And yet, there was no acknowledgement of what I had heard. No apology for the hurt. They acted like nothing had happened, as if I was just being difficult or forgetful. The barrage only intensified. Relatives I hadn't heard from in months, even years, suddenly reached out. Their concern thinly veiled suspicion. Maybe you're stressed. One cousin said. Maybe you need help. Their words almost made me laugh. Stress, clarity. Yes. I saw everything for the first time with brutal clarity. I realized they didn't need me as a person. They needed me as a bank. My support was conditional. Transactional. The love I thought I bought was an illusion. Their affection vanished the moment I stopped paying. And with that realization came a cold, unfamiliar calm. I was no longer angry. I was done. Then came the shift. After the initial rage burned out, their tactics changed. Guilt replaced anger. Suddenly, I was the ungrateful one, the selfish daughter who abandoned family in their time of need. Old memories resurfaced in texts, childhood photos, inside jokes, nostalgic pleas masked as heartfelt reminders. My mother sent a message that was less harsh, more desperate, a fragile olive branch wrapped in hope that I might relent. My sister's texts grew softer, offering support, cautioning me gently about the consequences of my silence. But beneath the words was an unspoken demand: come back. Fix this. Be the daughter I once was. Yet I couldn't go back. That phone call had pulled back the curtain. I heard their true voices, their real feelings. And once you hear that, there is no erasing it. No, pretending it never happened. I listened to my uncle's voicemail again, a roundabout apology about emotions running high, about venting and not meaning what was said. But the damage was done. They knew I was listening. And I was listening with new ears. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was resignation. They'd tried manipulation, guilt, pleading. None of it worked. So they switched to cold silence, the quiet weapon meant to make me question myself, to doubt my decisions. But this time, the silence confirmed what I already knew without the money. I didn't matter. I wasn't the daughter, the sister, the cousin. I was a problem to be managed or ignored. I checked my accounts one last time. All the automatic payments were still cancelled. No new transfers. No apologies. No direct questions. Just a hollow void where family used to be. There was no grand confrontation. No explosive argument. Just a slow unraveling. A thread pulled too tight, snapping under invisible pressure. I could have called, explained, begged for understanding. I could have told them I wasn't angry, only exhausted from trying to earn their respect. To be seen as more than just a bank. But I didn't. They didn't deserve that closure. Not after the betrayal. Not after the moment I heard their true feelings. So I did nothing. I let the silence settle. Loud and undeniable. For the first time in my life. I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight. I wasn't waiting for their love, their approval. I was finally living on my own terms. And that was enough. The silence from my family lingered. Heavy and oppressive. But instead of retreating further into bitterness, I began to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self. The weeks after my decision felt like stepping into a new world. One where I was no longer bound by invisible strings of obligation and guilt. For the first time, I was the author of my own story. Free from their scripted expectations. Yet, the wounds ran deep. I had been carrying their judgment and disapproval for years. Shaping who I thought I was. Untangling from that identity was painful and disorienting. I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor. The tech industry, once just a job, became my sanctuary. Each project completed was a small victory. A reminder that my worth wasn't measured by family approval, but by my own skills and integrity. I hired a small team of people who saw me for who I was. Not what I could provide. Together, we built something meaningful. It wasn't just about success anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity. But even as I forged ahead, the emotional scars from my family's betrayal refused to fade quietly. Memories of overhearing that call, the harsh words, the mocking tones played on a relentless loop in my mind. Sometimes, late at night, I would catch myself flinching at imagined voices, reliving the sting of rejection. It wasn't just financial support I had lost, it was love, respect, and the validation that every child craves from their family. The realization that I had been reduced to an ATM, a resource to be used and discarded, was a profound wound that took time to heal. The hardest part wasn't just what they said, but who they truly were, the people I had hoped would stand by me no matter what. Their silence after the call was louder than any accusation. A brutal confirmation of how little I really mattered. Yet, this painful clarity was also a catalyst. I began to see them not as a family that failed me, but as individuals trapped in their own cycles of selfishness and denial. Understanding this didn't lessen the hurt, but it gave me perspective, and with perspective came power. One unexpected moment of solace came from reconnecting with an old friend, Emily. She had always been a quiet presence in my life. Someone who listened without judgment and offered support without conditions. When I confided in her about the family fallout, she didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she challenged me gently. "You're not responsible for fixing them," she said. "Your job is to protect yourself." That simple truth became a mantra I repeated whenever doubt crept in, helping me stand firm when the past tried to pull me back. The financial consequences of cutting off support rippled through my family's life in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. My sister's tuition deadlines passed unanswered. My mother struggled with mortgage payments. My cousin lost access to the car I'd been funding. Hearing about their struggles was difficult. But I refused to let guilt dictate my actions. They had choices. Two choices I never had when I was drowning under their needs. It was a harsh lesson, but necessary. My resources, my time, and my energy were finite, and I had to invest them where they were valued. Despite the distance, a part of me longed for reconciliation, for a moment when they would acknowledge the truth and take responsibility. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that wasn't going to happen, not on their terms. At least. Instead, I watched as the narrative shifted. I was recast as the villain, the ungrateful child who abandoned family in their time of need. The subtle manipulations, the guilt trips disguised as concern, became routine tactics to draw me back into their orbit. But I stayed silent, resolute in my boundaries. That silence was a different kind of rebellion, a refusal to engage in the toxic cycle of blame and denial. I realized that true strength wasn't in confrontation, but in choosing peace over chaos. I didn't need their approval or forgiveness to move forward. What I needed was to build a life rooted in authenticity, where my worth was defined by my actions and values, not their expectations. Slowly, the fog of years spent trying to please began to lift. I started making space for new relationships, friends and colleagues who saw me as a whole person, not a provider. I embraced activities that nourished my soul, from early morning runs to quiet evenings with a book. Each small act of self-care was a declaration I mattered. My life was mine to live, on my own terms. Yet, beneath the calm surface, a fire still burned. A simmering resolve born from the pain of betrayal. I knew that the journey wasn't just about healing, it was about justice. Not revenge, born of spite, but a reckoning that held them accountable for the way they had treated me. I began to carefully gather the pieces of their behavior, the lies, the betrayals, the moments of cruelty, and document them. It wasn't for confrontation, but to understand fully the forces that shaped my past and to prepare for whatever came next. The deeper I delved into this reckoning, the more I uncovered patterns of manipulation and control that extended beyond just my immediate family. There were cousins who played roles I hadn't noticed before, aunts who facilitated silence, and even family friends complicit in the facade. This realization expanded the scope of the story. My story revealing a web of dysfunction that had thrived on secrecy and denial. It was a family drama in the truest sense, but also a story of survival and empowerment. With every revelation, my plan to reclaim my narrative grew clearer. I was no longer a passive victim but an active force, ready to set boundaries, expose truths, and, when necessary, walk away from toxic ties. The journey ahead was daunting, but the stakes had never been higher. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my future, and, ultimately, my peace. And yet, as the storm inside me gathered strength, a quiet question lingered: could healing come without reconciliation? Could I truly move forward without the closure I longed for? The answer was uncertain. But one thing was clear: I was no longer waiting for permission to live my life. The decision to confront my past head-on wasn't sudden. It was the result of countless quiet moments of reflection and the slow accumulation of clarity. The first step was setting firm boundaries, something I'd never been able to do before. I blocked numbers, muted group chats, and limited my exposure to family gatherings. It wasn't easy. There was always that small voice inside me that feared losing what little connection remained. But each day I held my ground. That voice grew quieter. Instead of being pulled into their drama, I channeled my energy into something more constructive. I sought therapy, something I dismissed for years as unnecessary. It became a lifeline, a place to unravel the knots of guilt, resentment, and confusion. Talking through the layers of my experience with someone trained to listen without judgment gave me new tools to understand my feelings and reactions. It was as if I was finally learning to be kind to myself. Meanwhile, the silence from my family transformed from a cold absence to a glaring void. Their sporadic messages, once laced with guilt and manipulation, became less frequent until they ceased altogether. The void was painful but also liberating. It forced me to confront the reality that sometimes people don't come back not because they don't care, but because they are unwilling or incapable of change. That was a hard truth, but accepting it freed me from the endless hope that had kept me chained. Amidst this personal growth, unexpected opportunities emerged. My work in tech expanded beyond what I had imagined possible. I was offered a leadership role at a startup focusing on innovative social platforms, a chance to build something that connected people authentically. A stark contrast to the superficial connections I'd endured in my family. The irony was not lost on me. I was creating community in a way my own family never had. With renewed confidence, I also began to explore new relationships, friends who became chosen family. These people saw me for who I was, not what I could give them. They celebrated my successes without envy, supported me through setbacks without judgment. For the first time, I felt the warmth of genuine belonging. This wasn't about blood or obligation, it was about mutual respect and care. Despite the healing and progress, a part of me remained wary. The memory of that accidental call, the harsh words spoken in ignorance of my presence, was a constant reminder that the past was never far behind. I found myself scanning for signs, wary of slipping back into old patterns of dependency or denial. But each time doubt arose, I reminded myself why I had chosen this path: the freedom to live without fear, to define my worth on my own terms. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message from Uncle Lou. His tone was softer than before, tinged with a tentative regret. He didn't apologize directly, but his words acknowledged the fracture between us. It was the first real crack in the wall of silence. For a moment, I felt the old tug of connection, the desire to bridge the divide. But I also knew that any reconciliation would have to be on my terms, with honesty and respect, conditions that had long been missing. That message became a turning point. It forced me to articulate what I truly wanted from my family: accountability, respect, and clear boundaries. I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about redefining the future. Could my family meet me there? I didn't know. But I was no longer willing to sacrifice my peace to find out. As the months passed, the story of my estrangement quietly spread through the family's social circles. Gossip and speculation filled the void left by my silence. I heard through mutual acquaintances about whispered judgments and assumptions. Yet, I refused to engage. I had learned that their narrative was just that: their story, not mine. I was writing my own, one step at a time. In the quiet moments of solitude, I often reflected on the paradox of family, the deep bonds of shared history intertwined with the pain of unmet expectations and betrayal. I understood now that love could be complicated, imperfect, and sometimes absent altogether. But the absence of love from one chapter didn't mean the book was finished. There were pages yet to be written, stories yet to be told. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The weight of years of trying to fit into a role I never chose was finally lifting. I was no longer defined by their acceptance or rejection. I was free to be myself, flawed, strong, imperfect, but whole. That night, I made a promise to myself to continue building a life grounded in authenticity and self-respect, to nurture relationships that honored my worth, and to never again settle for less than I deserved. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. As time passed, I began to rebuild not only my life but also my sense of self-worth. No longer tethered to the expectations and disappointments of my family, I ventured into new territories both professionally and personally. My role at the startup grew, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. I found joy in leading teams who valued collaboration and integrity, in stark contrast to the family dynamics I had escaped. The success was sweet, but what mattered more was the internal shift. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. This growth wasn't without its challenges. Occasionally, memories of the past would resurface like shadows at dusk, uninvited, yet persistent. Those moments tested my resolve, making me question if I was truly ready to sever ties or if part of me still longed for approval that would never come. But each time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of that accidental phone call the moment the mask fell away. The truth I had heard was raw and unfiltered, but it also became my anchor. A painful yet liberating revelation that strengthened my boundaries. One surprising development was the emergence of new relationships that challenged my preconceptions about family. Friends who had once been casual acquaintances stepped into more meaningful roles, offering support that felt unconditional. Their acceptance was not based on what I could provide but on who I was. It was in these connections that I discovered an alternative family, one built on mutual respect, empathy, and trust. They didn't replace my blood relatives, but they filled spaces that had long been empty. Despite my distance, the family drama wasn't completely over. I heard whispers and saw posts on social media, snide remarks and thinly veiled accusations. It was clear that my absence had left a vacuum, and the narrative was being rewritten without me. I chose not to engage, recognizing that their stories served their purposes, just as mine served mine. This detachment was another form of freedom. I was no longer a character in their play, but the author of my own. The turning point came unexpectedly one evening when I received an invitation to a mutual friends gathering. It was a low-key event, nothing like the elaborate family celebrations I had once planned and funded. Initially hesitant, I decided to attend, curious to see if I could navigate social spaces without the weight of family expectations. The evening unfolded with warmth and genuine connection, a stark contrast to the performative interactions I'd endured. It was a subtle but powerful affirmation that I was moving forward, crafting a life filled with authentic relationships. At the gathering, I crossed paths with Uncle Lou. Our interaction was brief, measured, and devoid of the tension that had marked our past communications. There was no apology, no explanation, just a mutual, unspoken acknowledgement of the distance between us. Yet, it was a step. It showed that even fractured ties could evolve into something less painful. or at least less confrontational. I left that night with a mixture of relief and guarded hope, knowing that some wounds might never fully heal, but that peace was still possible. As the months turned into a year, I embraced a new rhythm of life. I traveled more, seeking solace and inspiration in new places. I reconnected with passions I had long neglected: painting, writing, moments of quiet reflection. These activities became acts of reclaiming myself, rituals of healing. I documented my journey, not for validation, but as a testament to resilience. Sharing my story with others who had faced similar struggles became a source of strength and solidarity. Looking back, I understood that my story was not just about betrayal or abandonment. It was about reclaiming agency in a world that often tries to define us by our relationships rather than our individuality. The accidental phone call was a catalyst, but the real transformation came from within: the decision to choose myself over the expectations and disappointments of others. It was a radical act of self-love, one that required courage and conviction. Yet, I also recognized the complexity of family dynamics. Love and pain often coexist in tangled webs. And forgiveness is not always about reconciliation, but about releasing the burden of bitterness. I learned that setting boundaries is not an act of selfishness, but a necessary form of self-care. By protecting my well-being, I opened space for healthier connections both with others and with myself. The final chapters of my story were still being written, but the narrative was clear. I was no longer a passive participant, but an empowered protagonist. The lessons learned were hard-earned but invaluable. I had transformed pain into purpose, rejection into renewal. And though the echoes of the past might never fully fade, they no longer dictated my future. Story 3. My name is Emma. I'm 21. And Thanksgiving was supposed to be a day for family, gratitude, and warmth. But that evening, as I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home in suburban Chicago, dinner started as usual: polite smiles, our forced conversations, and the typical small talk that fills so many family gatherings. My aunt asked about my work. My cousin announced her engagement. And then Jordan stood up, tapping his glass as if he was about to receive an award. Instead, he delivered a business pitch: Stride Theory, a custom sneaker brand he claimed was his big break. I just need a little capital, he said, eyes sparkling with hope. 50. His words hung in the air, the implication clear. Mom nodded eagerly, her eyes flickering toward me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It's what Grandpa would have wanted, she added softly, as if quoting some unspoken family mandate. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. You want me to give you my inheritance? My voice was. Mom's smile faltered, then hardened. Not give invest, she corrected. Then came the ultimatum, sharp and unforgiving. You're either with us or against us. Daddy. Mom leaned in, voice thick with wounded pride. After everything we've done for you, the roof over your head. When I didn't yell, I didn't lash out. I stood up, quietly grabbed my jacket and keys. But beneath that silence was a truth I had been preparing for years. Grandpa Z. By morning, the illusion of control my family clung to began to crumble. The shared mortgage account was frozen pending trust verification. The credit line Dad had been using to fund Jordan's ventures was locked after the trustee flagged suspicious activity. The landscaping company's business account, which paid for vacations and Jordan's car lease, was paused for audit. All quietly, all legally, all irreversible. I didn't have to explain myself. I simply invoked a clause. Grandpa had included a safety net that allowed the executor to stop disbursements if assets were misused or if family members acted coercively. They had pushed me to the edge. I pushed back with legal ink and cold determination. The morning light spilled through my apartment window as my phone started buzzing relentlessly. Missed calls, texts, and voicemails from my mom, Dad, Jordan, even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in months. It was as if the moment their access to money vanished, they suddenly found their voices. But I ignored them all. No calls answered. No messages returned. I needed to be steady, focused. By 7 a.m., the family's shared mortgage account was locked, pending verification from the trustee. The credit line Dad had been using to patch up Jordan's failing projects was frozen automatically. The landscaping business account, long a source of secret funds for family vacations and luxury indulgences, was halted for a thorough audit. My move was surgical, no room for mistakes. I sipped my coffee on the balcony, watching the sun rise as their desperate messages piled up. Unread. I imagined Jordan's first swipe on his credit card being declined. The sharp confusion on Mom's face when she logged into the joint account and saw it frozen. I pictured the panic bubbling beneath their carefully maintained facades. They had assumed I'd cave, that I'd fold like always to keep the peace. But this time, there was no peace left to keep. Their faces had drawn a line in the sand, and I was drawing mine in legal ink. By mid-morning, I received an email from the family accountant, followed by a message from my uncle, demanding answers about restrictions placed on the foundation account. The web was unraveling faster than they could contain. They weren't just losing access to funds, they were losing control over the one person who had always stayed silent. That afternoon, the silence broke, but not with apologies or furious confrontations as I expected. Instead, they launched a campaign of subtle manipulation. The story morphed into a narrative where I had misunderstood Thanksgiving, where pressure had been misread as coercion, where love had been mistaken for demands. My mom painted me as the emotional one, acting out of impulse rather than reason. Dad dismissed my actions as overreactions that hurt the entire family. Jordan lamented how I had humiliated him in front of everyone, as if his half-baked business plan was some sacred moment. I saw through it all. This was not remorse. It was strategy. When anger failed to bend me, they moved to guilt. Mom enlisted extended family members, those distant cousins and aunts who suddenly remembered how important family unity was, all echoing the idea that Grandpa would have wanted peace, not division. They conveniently left out the moments when I was cornered at the table, the ultimatum issued, or the cold silence that followed my refusal. They were rewriting the story, casting me as the villain who destroyed everything over a simple conversation. What they didn't count on was that I had receipts, not just financial ones, but emotional ones too. I remembered every time I covered for Jordan's failures, every bill I quietly paid for my parents while they lived extravagantly. I recalled how I was expected to be the calm one, the peacemaker, the invisible family ATM. And most of all, I remembered Grandpa's words in his final week. In a quiet, private moment, he told me how disappointed he was with the family's obsession with appearances, entitlement, and shortcuts. He warned that people like me, those who work hard, stay quiet, and support others often become invisible until they stop giving. Then, suddenly, they're labeled selfish. He left me in charge for a reason, and I wasn't about to undo what he had protected just because they didn't like the consequences. They could twist the story, play the victim in group chats, and whisper behind my back. But they weren't getting a single cent, not this time. Days passed with an eerie silence from my family's side, as if they were regrouping, recalculating their next move. But I wasn't passive. I was taking control. The phone calls stopped. But the war had only shifted to the shadows. My family, masters of manipulation, didn't know how to apologize. They only knew how to rewrite the narrative. A few days later, I noticed a carefully crafted Facebook post from Mom, an old photo of her and Jordan at the family property. Smiles pasted on, with a caption about family always finding its way back. The house was still technically under the family trust, still under my control. The message was clear: they wanted the world to believe everything was fine. But behind the smiles, their empire was crumbling. Word spread quietly that Jordan had been pitching investors again, boasting about upcoming funding and how the family finances were back on track. He even whispered to some that I had come around and was helping him behind the scenes. That was the final straw. They weren't just rewriting the story, they were trying to monetize it. I called the trustee and formally requested the dissolution of all non-essential shared assets, the family vacation home, the secondary land plots, the business interests Dad and Uncle had quietly used for off-the-books deals. Everything went under legal audit. I had gathered all the proof: misuse of funds, unpaid taxes, phantom expenses. The lawyer's warning to them was already delivered once. Now they faced the full force of consequences. But I didn't stop there. I engineered a controlled release of information, agreeing to one interview with a local finance blog known for covering legacy wealth and family business disputes. I told my side calmly and clinically: financial abuse within families, caretakers used until they break, the danger of enabling entitled adult children under the guise of support. I didn't name names, but anyone reading between the lines would know. The article went viral locally, shared widely by people who had lived through similar betrayals. Local business owners reached out with their own stories. Then the fallout began. Jordan's reputation took a nosedive. Investors ghosted him. His name became synonymous with instability. The landscaping company's audit unearthed Uncle's shady write-offs. Dad tried to access an emergency fund only to find it had been legally converted to a grand account under third-party oversight I'd hired. They were bleeding slowly and publicly. And I wasn't even hiding anymore. They called me selfish, cold, heartless, but they were learning the cost of breaking the one person who had quietly kept them afloat for years. By the end of the month, the cracks had become chasms. Jordan's startup quietly folded. Rumors swirled that investors had backed out once they saw frozen accounts and no clear financial trail. His leased car was repossessed. Friends stopped tagging him in social posts. The flashy Instagram presence he once flaunted evaporated, like someone who suddenly realized they had nothing left to prove. Meanwhile, my parents clung to illusions. They smiled at church, posted old family photos online, pretended nothing had changed. But change was undeniable. The house, their supposed legacy, was quietly listed for sale. No signs in the yard, just a subtle online posting. They couldn't keep up with the mortgage without the financial scaffolding I had dismantled. Through it all, I remained silent. No gloating, no confrontations, just waiting as their fantasy crumbled in silence. Then I made my final move. There was one last shared account, a savings vault my grandfather had created years ago for emergencies or future family needs. It was untouched. The last hidden reserve. They had plans for it. Jordan thought it would fund his next venture. Dad spoke of a vacation property. Mom mentioned saving for the grandkids. None of those plans ever materialized. I dissolved the account and redirected the funds into a private scholarship in my grandfather's name, for students aging out of foster care for kids with no safety net. No inheritance. No family to turn to. I met with the advisor personally. Set it up so no one could reverse it. No announcements. No press releases. Just an email confirmation locked away with the rest of the paperwork, under a folder titled Final. They would never know. They would never touch it. When the dust finally settled, there was nothing left between us. No money. No strings. No leverage. The family that told me to choose, fall in line, or be cut off had lost their power over me completely. They thought I'd come crawling back. I didn't. I didn't scream. Didn't burn bridges. I just took the blueprint they built their entitlement on and erased it. They gambled with the one thing they never should have, the quiet strength of the one they tried to break. And this time, they don't get to rewrite the ending. The months that followed marked a new chapter in my life, one I never thought I'd see. Freed from the weight of family expectations and toxic ties, I began to rebuild on my own terms. My days filled with the simple joy of control over my own destiny. Something I'd longed for but never truly had. The scholarship I'd created in my grandfather's name became more than a silent rebellion. It was a beacon of hope for those forgotten by society. Knowing I was making a real difference gave me a strength no argument or betrayal ever could. I often pictured the faces of the 4 foster kids whose lives would be changed. Their futures brighter because someone believed in setting boundaries instead of blindly giving. Yet, despite the calm exterior, shadows from the past still lingered. My phone buzzed unexpectedly one chilly autumn evening with an unknown number. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity and old instincts compelled me to answer. The voice was hesitant, unfamiliar yet filled with remorse. It was Jordan. His words tumbled out like a confession. He spoke of regret, therapy sessions, and the weight of realization that finally dawned on him how deeply his actions and our parents' manipulation had fractured not just me but all of us. He admitted he was lost but wanted to try to be better. I listened quietly, the anger simmering beneath a fragile layer of empathy. This was a different Jordan, or at least a man trying to become different. Whether this was the beginning of genuine change or just another chapter in a long saga of empty promises, I couldn't tell yet. But something in his voice stirred a flicker of cautious hope. A few weeks later, an invitation arrived, elegant and unexpected. Jordan and his fiancée were getting married. And despite everything, they wanted me there. The note was personal, apologetics, and tinged with vulnerability. It acknowledged the past but looked toward a future they hoped to build. No longer under the shadow of old mistakes, I stared at the invitation for a long time. The heavy paper cool against my fingertips. A storm of emotions battled within me: anger, resentment, the ghost of a once unbreakable bond. But beneath it all, I sensed a chance for closure, maybe even healing. When the day arrived, I walked into the vineyard where the wedding was held. Surrounded by gentle twilight and soft laughter, I was alone. But the crowd that welcomed me felt like a chosen family: friends, mentors, the people who saw me for who I truly was. Not a resource to be used or a shadow to be ignored. Across the lawn, I spotted my parents, sitting quietly at a small table, their faces aged by shame and defeat. They saw me, and for a moment, the air crackled with the weight of unsaid words. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but my father gently stopped her. An unspoken truce forming in that silent gesture. Later, as I moved through the reception, I passed by them again. You look well, my mother said, her voice hollow but sincere. I am, I replied with a quiet nod. The years of bitterness and betrayal had not vanished. But the distance between us had finally settled into something like peace, or at least the absence of war. I turned away from them and joined Jordan and his fiancée. His eyes met mine, filled with a complex mix of shame and gratitude. You came, he whispered. I did, I said, clapping his shoulder gently. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could all move forward. The night ended with laughter and music, with friends who had become family, and a heart finally unburdened. As the stars glittered overhead, I realized the story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me and the life I was choosing to live on my own terms. The days after the wedding felt surreal. For the first time, I was stepping out from the shadows of a family legacy stained by manipulation and favoritism. But freedom wasn't simply the absence of chains, it was also about building something new on solid ground. I threw myself deeper into my work, channeling every ounce of energy into the company Thomas and I had nurtured from nothing into something real. It was no longer just a job, it was my sanctuary. My proof that I could define success on my own terms. Yet, even in my newfound strength, the ghosts of my past occasionally crept in. I'd catch myself wondering if I had been too harsh, if forgiveness was a bridge I had burned. The line between justice and bitterness blurred in the quiet moments late at night when exhaustion left space for doubt. Could I ever truly let go, or was I destined to carry this scar forever? Then, unexpectedly, the call came, a lifeline thrown from the most unlikely source. Ryan, Jordan's fiancé, reached out to me. She was no longer the outsider at the Thanksgiving table, but someone who had witnessed the unraveling from close up and felt the weight of its impact. Her voice was steady but honest, a mix of guilt and hope. She wanted to talk, to explain what she had seen and how they were trying to change. Our conversation was cautious at first, each word measured, like crossing fragile ice. But as we peeled back layers of pain, I realized she wasn't just a messenger for Jordan, she was a voice of conscience in a family too tangled in old patterns to see clearly. Her honesty was unexpected, a mirror reflecting truths I had wrestled with alone. This dialogue opened a new door. Not just for me, but for them too. It was not reconciliation. Not yet. But the beginning of accountability. For the first time, I saw cracks in their armor, genuine regret breaking through the defensive walls. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a glimmer of possibility that even the hardest hearts could soften. Still, the path forward remained uncertain. Trust, once shattered, does not mend overnight. And while some threads of connection began to weave back tentatively, others frayed irreparably. I had learned that not all wounds heal. And sometimes survival means knowing when to walk away and when to hold on. My relationship with Thomas deepened during this time. He became more than a business partner, a mentor, a friend, someone who understood the complexities of rebuilding life from ashes. His unwavering belief in integrity and hard work grounded me, reminding me that true strength lies in resilience and authenticity. One afternoon, as we reviewed plans for expansion, Thomas looked at me with a rare softness. "You've come a long way," he said. "More than most people ever do." His words struck a chord. It wasn't just about success or revenge anymore, it was about transformation of self, of purpose. Yet, even as my world grew brighter, the shadow of my family's betrayal lingered at the edges. A part of me remained vigilant, wary of old patterns trying to creep back in under new guises. I knew that to protect my peace, I had to stay alert and keep the boundaries firm. And then, just as I thought I had found stability, a new message arrived, a reminder that the past never fully lets go. An anonymous email, filled with rumors and insinuations designed to unsettle me, tried to reignite old doubts and fears. It was a calculated move, a last attempt to destabilize the foundation I had so carefully rebuilt. Instead of fear, it sparked something else, a fierce determination not to be dragged back into chaos. I forwarded the message to my lawyer and responded publicly with calm clarity, refusing to be baited into drama. The silence that followed was telling. The shadows retreated, at least for now. With this, I realized that true power isn't just in fighting battles, it's in choosing which ones to fight and when to rise above. My story was no longer about proving myself to a family that never valued me. It was about honoring the woman I had become, the life I was building, and the legacy I would leave, one not forged by entitlement or betrayal, but by strength, justice, and grace. As I closed my laptop that evening, a sense of peace settled over me. The road ahead was still long, and there would be storms yet to face. But I was ready, not because I was unbreakable, but because I was unyielding.